Hello, good evening. Welcome to Instructional Design from the Ground Up. We're live tonight, and we apologize for that right up front. We're going to have some fun. We're going to talk about focus groups. We're going to tell jokes. I have secrets I'm going to tell you about Ashley, and we're just going to have a great time here. So, we are so happy you're with us. If you're watching this live, jump in and get on the chat line and throw in some questions and comments. If you're watching this post production, then you get to miss all the fun of making fun of us and asking questions we can't answer. Denise, we haven't done a Stump the Chump session in quite a while. Maybe we should
Yeah, I
bring
know.
that back.
I think
So
we probably should because that's a fun thing going on. Stump the chump. I
it's
like
not
it.
really hard to,
I
to
like the
stump
name.
me.
I like the phrase.
So my daughter-in-law came up with, she thought that was what we should use, is Stump the Chump.
I
That's where
love
we
it.
are
We
with
should
this.
start we should start doing the wheel of pain is what we should do.
Oh yeah. So
You know?
Ashley, you want to do the Wheel of Pain tonight? We could do that. You up for it?
Let's do it. Yeah.
Okay, well, as long as you're in for it.
Oh yeah.
So, folks, what we're going to do, actually, Denise and I, we are going to talk about focus groups tonight. And focus groups are an integral part of instructional design. Everybody does them a little bit different, I think, and you'll see that as Ashley and I talk through our different approaches to this. But I want you to think about it in terms of what this really means to you as an instructional designer, and how the practice of instructional design often offers you opportunities to do focus groups and different things. And whether you use them in analysis or evaluation or in lots of other ways that we'll talk about, I think it's for a good reason that you start to poke at this a little bit if you've never done them. And I can remember being horribly intimidated the first couple of focus groups because it's tough to get in front of a group of people you don't know and try to get information out of them and act like you know what you're doing. And I still can't act like I know what I'm doing, but I can't get information out of people. And what I found when I first started this is I could not find anywhere how to do these. There were different places I'd look about information on them, but I never really saw a menu or a roadmap on how to do this. So I started poking around, and we'll present my view of it tonight. But actually, what do you think about these things? I mean, I really think they're integral to being an instructional designer.
I think they're underutilized. I think it's the special sauce that folks really tend to forget. People think with analysis, all you can do is really just comb through existing resources or maybe put out a simple survey, and they're not understanding one, focus groups are not as intimidating as they seem, first
True.
of all, right? And two, that they yield so much more valuable data than people give them credit for. And it's like
Yep.
if you are ready to feel the fear and do it anyway, you're going to get so much more benefit out of it than you realize.
Yeah, feel the fear. Yeah, I think I can feel the fear. So let's
Right.
ask Denise. Have you ever participated in a focus group, Denise, or have you ever? I mean, I know you've led focus groups, right?
I have not led or participated in focus
Really?
groups. So I feel like I have this
Oh,
really cool
wow.
position right here that I'm sitting like a fly on a wall, listening to two experts talk about this
Well, you
this
got one expert in me.
I was going to say, you hear that, Chuck? She called you an expert.
Yeah, she's talking about you, actually, obviously. But so this will be interesting. When we get towards the end of this session, I want you, Denise, to pop in and tell us what you picked up and what you thought and whether you think you'd like to do them.
hmm
And the one thing I found with focus groups is you really need to do them in triangulation with other things, like do it with a survey, do it with one-on-one interviews, do
Yes.
it going through data that you can harvest from one place or another. Don't make it the only thing you do. I mean, if it's okay, but it's not going to triangulate. You're not going to be able to look and see if you got valid data from anything unless you have more than one point of data collection. And the thing that I found with focus groups is I can get people, and anybody that leads these, get people to say things that they would not say in any other way. There's something about this interaction that really gets people. If you create the environment, you must create that environment. But if you make it open
Mhm.
enough and you make it confidential, if you need to do that, you don't have extraneous people sitting in the back who are experts at something staring at everybody and all the other ground rule things that we'll talk about, you can get some incredible data.
Mhm.
Well, let me
Yeah,
tell you Chuck's story because I have to have a Chuck story.
we need a Chuck story.
Of
So let's
course.
start.
Bring it home.
So we got a project, and I won't say who we was, and I will not say who the project was for, but it was a large group. It was 38,000 people in this organization, and they were having trouble communicating with each other. And there was some thought that it would be an issue. Maybe we could provide some training in communications or doing those kind of things, which is a usual place that you fall back when you think people aren't talking. Maybe they don't know how to talk. So we did surveys and we did whatever. And then we put together a series of 10 focus groups from a representative sample of this 30 plus thousand people. And we picked them by every nth, which we'll talk about on how you pick people for focus groups. You really want to be careful how you select people. So we went through this. We went through 10 focus groups over a week. We try to do 2 a day, just give everybody a rest and what have you. And at the end of this period, what we found out that the problem was not with communications, it was with the people that were communicating. And over the next month, the executive director of this organization actually resigned. Gladly resigned because it was obvious to he or she that perhaps somebody could come in and be better at what they were trying to accomplish and what they were able to do. And I would call that a complete surprise in terms of what we walked in thinking we were going to do and what we walked out with. And I think that's the power of focus groups when you get people to really talk about issues and about what was going on. And what surfaced was they had the greatest respect for this individual. They thought this was a perfect person for this position, but they felt that maybe there could be some better communications bidirectionally. It wasn't just down
Mhm.
from the top, but also from the bottom. People needed to, you know, give their game up a little bit and come in and do what you want.
Chuck, this was found from a focus group. This was
Yes.
input that you
It
data that
was
you
a
collected.
report. Yeah, it was a report from the focus group
Okay.
that actually led to this. It wasn't even including the surveys and the individual interviews. This was just transcript from the focus group. That's one thing we
I
always did
love
is we
it.
transcribed. So, and it was a very positive thing. It maybe it's not what it sounds like at a first glance. It wasn't just, oh wow, we found somebody that didn't fit and we got rid of them. No, it wasn't that at all. It was this person saw from what was coming out of this information that maybe there was a better fit for this, and he or she's love for the organization was such that they were willing to go into another role and see if they could find somebody.
Yeah.
So you're not going to have this every focus group you might have it once in your career, but I think the point being that what you get out of this is of such a depth
Mhm.
and such a purpose that it's not your traditional analysis or evaluation type of event.
And I feel like you're touching on a crucial element of instructional design at like the apex moment, right, in the analysis phase of a project where the stakeholder or the client comes in and tells you explicitly what's wrong with everybody and what needs to be
Yep.
fixed, right?
Mhm. Yeah, none of us have sat through that session.
Exactly. Exactly. And you, as the instructional designer, have to be very intentional about. I'm excited for you telling that story because it's clear that you were asking very intentional questions and
Yeah,
structuring your audience in a very intentional way. So I'm
absolutely.
looking forward to getting into that. But what you stumbled upon in telling this story is the reality that if you do this right, as a practitioner of this industry, you have the ability to truly understand what your audience needs
Yes.
versus what your stakeholders are communicating.
Yeah. And I found just like the person in the basement that gets on Facebook and corrects everybody and that person, don't be that person. But you get that a lot in surveys. You get that a lot in data gathering that is not face to face.
Right.
And even if you're Zooming a focus group, you can get the same kind of results. And I think there's just something about that interpersonal relationship between
Mhm.
a facilitator and a population that allows you to, on the fly, figure out where you go next and the questions you need to ask when you get in the gooey middle of a focus group and come up with some great stuff. So I don't know. Maybe we should just start going through what I do, or Ashley, if you want to go first, you want to talk about how you do focus groups. Either way, you want to
Uh,
go first?
sure. Why
Okay.
not?
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, yours is going to be better anyway.
oh, please. I mean, so my process, it starts off very structured so that I have the ability to improvise in the moment, right? So I begin with a set of major questions based on the objectives presented to me by my client or my stakeholder. And those are the things that I'm seeking to determine from my focus group. And then, based on those major questions, I break down a set of minor questions by audience.
Hmm.
So, for example, when I was working for a major retailer, when I did my first focus group, um, I was able to look at, okay, based on the communities that I'm speaking to, this is the minor question. And from that minor question, here's a set of 10 actual questions that I want to ask to answer these questions and ultimately feed up to my major question that
Yeah.
I'm researching. And from there, I develop a set of 1 to 2 conversational questions. And then I create an actual worksheet. This sounds so
Of,
intense.
of course you do. Gee, isn't this
Right,
a surprise, Ashley?
right. I create an actual worksheet where I structure, the topics that I want to discuss and the questions, and I have a space for writing. And then I confirm what my recording mechanism is going to be, and then I draft my release statement. So
Okay.
I think the release statement is crucial because I feel like it creates a space for vulnerability where people
Hmm.
know that, what I say isn't going to ultimately go back to my boss. And so that, has yielded really positive results. And then I do a crap ton of promotion. But to Chuck's point, one thing that I like to do is create some sort of survey and then give people the option to participate depending on what their role is within an organization. Um, and then from there, it almost feels like a therapy session. Like when I'm actually in doing a focus group, it just feels so cathartic because, in the course of your job, how often do people actually care about how you're doing or, what you think about a topic,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think all the psychologists out there are budding psychologists. I'm now in the Department of Psychology, which I find amazing, which somebody made a mistake. but
I was about to say,
but but the whole thing, this notion of there's a lot of people just are so dumbfounded that somebody cares about their opinion on the work site, right? My
yeah.
employer actually cares what my opinion is, and especially when you deep dive into an organization got some real problems, and there you are listening. And I
Mhm.
think you touched on a couple of things that I want to get into a little bit later about ground rules and the rest of it. But I like your design. Is there more to it than that? Is that
Well, I mean,
there's a
that's
lot more
that's
to it, right?
yeah, there's a lot more, but like if I were to simplify it in a minute or so, those are the big things. But like you're saying, Chuck, as I'm going through the conversation, I'm picking out, like you said, I'm establishing the ground rules. Everyone has to speak, and I'm picking out the people who I know are going to be my shining stars, the ones who want everyone in the room to know what they think.
Well,
And
usually that's not too difficult to find.
no,
It's pulling
exactly.
out the
And
ones that don't want to talk.
exactly. Yeah. And so, I take the time to be very present and mindful in the conversation that I'm having. And I engage in active listening techniques and exercises to make sure that I'm not, head down in my notes and that I'm really understanding what it is that they're trying to explain to me. The
Yeah.
other thing that I do that I think is really valuable, and I think a lot of people miss this opportunity in leading focus groups is I explain what I'm going to use the information for.
Yeah. No, I think that's incredibly
So you've
important.
got that transparency. And do you feel like, so I'm curious about the comfort level of people because I'm assuming the audience or the participants, I should say, run the gamut of shy to like completely outgoing. And I don't know, I guess I wonder how do you get those maybe hesitant people who are a little leery about saying their opinion and being afraid to speak out loud about these things?
Well, that goes to your design of your focus group. So one of the ground rules, if I think I'm going to have a group like that, is everybody has to speak before somebody speaks twice. That's a
Mhm.
ground rule that I use a lot. And when that happens, you have people that are wiggling and they got something to say. No, we're going to hear from everybody. And then once you do that one round, you don't have to do it again generally because people figure out, okay, I need to let everybody talk. But the other thing that I really spend a lot of time on is picking the people that are going to participate. And this kind of goes back to ground rules. It goes back to what you do before you ever get started. But I really like to do every nth. So if there's 500 people and we're going to have 9 people in there, it's, every 52nd person on a list is going to be part of this focus group.
Hey, Chuck,
Because,
you're
yeah,
frozen. You're frozen on our screen.
really.
You look good
Well,
though. You have a nice
I was
smile
about
on
to
your
say,
face.
yeah.
Like
yeah,
you,
why
you,
don't you put up the one that
you,
works
you,
best?
you don't
Yeah,
have like like a crooked smile and your eyes aren't doing
really.
some weird googly
I kind of,
thing.
let's leave that right where it's at. I think that's perfect. Yeah, yeah.
So I'm sure there's something with the internet gods are saying, let's freeze
Yeah,
Chuck on
my
that
internet.
smile.
No, see, this is where we have to know that Denise, when she thinks I'm getting out of control, she she freezes me, and
Um,
that happens. So
that
I will
does
come out and
happen.
come back in.
Go out,
Okay.
come back in, and we'll continue the conversation until Chuck the Shadow comes back. Okay.
Awesome. Yeah. Well,
Oh,
I
it's his
have plenty to
webcam.
say too. There he goes.
Yeah.
There he
So
is.
yeah, I
Woohoo!
have to be nice to Denise now because I know what'll happen. Do you still
Now
have
you
that
know her
frame, that
power.
freeze picture?
I'm sure that I do, but that was actually a really nice freeze frame. Like if you had to like have one of those like golden nuggets, like you really a beautiful picture to be frozen on. That was it.
It
That
was.
was it.
Well,
Yeah.
But
I have.
it's not as much fun as like some weird like you know
Right.
exactly.
Well, let's hope next time I freeze, I'm doing something incredibly embarrassing. And
Let's hope
we can
so.
let's make sure that we focus on that when we do post.
So we sort
Yeah.
of digressed here.
Yeah,
Um,
so we were, yeah, the Battle of 1812, as I
yeah.
recall. Oh no, it was focus groups.
Now, Chuck,
Um,
you had something to say about the sequence of implementation,
yes,
right?
okay. So
Why don't we start going through some of your points on that?
we can
And,
do that. Sequence of implementation. So as Ashley said, you want to kind of think about how you put this together in terms of what kind of questions you start with and
mhm.
what kind of things you do. So I always have opening questions.
All
And
right.
these are generally almost, we call them warm ups or openers. And these are things that may not even be on topic. So they could be, how's your day? Did you have trouble getting to work today? You
Mhm.
know, just something to break the ice a little bit. And depending on what you're doing, when you do political focus groups, you would ask questions here that were so loaded with one answer that it's even embarrassing. I won't even give you any of them when I was doing that work. But just the notion
Wouldn't
of,
you agree? Right.
yeah, don't you think America should be the number one country in the world? Don't you
Right.
agree? How can you say no to that? I mean, some people would just to get, because it's so arrogant to say that anyway. But it's, you can set these things up, and I would never do that. I absolutely would never do it. But warm up questions to me don't have to be related to topic at all. These are questions where I just want people to feel comfortable. So tell me
Right.
how many kids you got. Tell me about your family. What's your partner's name? Things that you hope are benign and you don't hit a nerve because they just got a divorce the night before, because you gotta be a little careful about those kind of things too. You can't
Hmm.
get too personal, but I think warm ups are really important. So create the environment,
Mm-hmm.
put people at a comfort level. Just do those kind of things. If you want to start to point them, you can definitely do that, but you don't want to get anything in here that's negative. So any question you ask should be something that would be a positive.
Mm-hmm. Now you
And
mentioned
then,
ground rules.
yeah, so ground rules, these I think are the most important. So this is where I would put up, okay, we're not going to record this. We're not going to transcribe this. No one else will hear verbatim what happens at this. Any remarks will not be attributed to one person, depending on your organization and what you've agreed to do. But I almost always say that no one will be attributed a comment. So
Right.
whatever is said are just general comments. Other ground rules are don't speak until everybody else had an opportunity. Do not go past a minute or set this time with whatever you want it to be. Try to stay positive. Gosh, what are the other things? That there will be nobody else in this room except the facilitator and assistant facilitator or note taker and the participants. If it's a video session, then there might have a videographer in there, but I honestly don't like to do those because that gives away too much stuff. I
Mm-hmm.
certainly wouldn't do it in an ISD format. There are other formats that I would do that in, but not in the things that we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
So establish everything here that you want to establish so that when you get into the heat of it and really get down to asking the questions that you think are important, you don't have to go back and say, well, we can't do it that way. And you want to think about all these things. And you may decide as an instructional designer, as you facilitate these, that you're not going to have any ground rules. So you're going to have minimal ground rules. And try it. See how it
Right. I was
goes
going to
for
say
you.
I wouldn't, but sure.
Give
Go
it a
ahead.
shot. But I've never seen it where you didn't want to have some ground rules because once you
Right.
get into some of these questions, you're going to have a ringleader. And if you don't
Hmm.
have these ground rules, and I always posted them on all four walls.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody could see them and everybody was, and we would even talk about whether we're going to have nameplates or not. Do you want your name in front of you or not? Do you want me to refer to you as number three?
Hmm.
I would have those kind of conversations too because I wanted groups to be at ease and to feel comfortable talking to me. So,
Mm-hmm.
what would you
Exactly.
have, Ashley? What kind of ground rules?
I mean, definitely the first one that you mentioned, that no one speaks twice unless everyone else has spoken. That's important. Definitely, the comment about, no comments will be attributed to any one specific person. I think another focus group ground rule I typically have is, and it depends on the space, but sometimes I want to, sometimes I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. Like sometimes it really can end up being a total venting fest. That's not the word I want to use, but
Food. I always say food fight.
there you go. Yes. But I try to ask people to provide solutions oriented feedback where they can. Because I
Hmm.
don't want to censor people too much, but I want to make sure that they're not attacking a person, but a problem.
Exactly.
So those, yeah, those are the kinds of ground rules that I typically set.
And I'm
And
glad you
then,
said that because one thing I always say is none of this is personal.
right.
None of this is about you or me or anybody else in this room. This is about issues and process. And at no point will we allow anybody to say anything personal about anybody else.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, ultimately, I want the time that I'm having with these people to have value and meaning. And
Hmm.
and I mean, if it was a diversity and inclusion focus group, I probably would give them the space to express themselves. But
Yeah,
uh,
that's
right, so those are the typical ground rules that I include in mine.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and I think that's important. And the other thing that I have sometimes problems with clients and organizing these things is they want somebody in the room, and I absolutely will not allow anybody else in the room. Well, our executive vice president of who thinks
Oh
what
gosh,
wants to
that's like the
participate.
worst way to build trust. Like, it's the easiest
I've
way to
Right.
actually had
reduce
I've
trust.
actually had to cancel them before because I'm not participating if this is what you're going to do.
Ah,
I don't
Mhm.
want any of your people in this room because you're creating more problems than I can ever fix after this. And maybe that's the problem you've got organizationally is you won't let go let people have a voice and talk about things. If you want
Exactly.
solutions, fine. If you're playing a game, get somebody else. I'm just not going to do that. So I think it's important. It's really important because you will get some clients that just will not back down on this one, and
Yeah.
nor will I. I'm just not going to back down. Well, can we watch through the window? I said, no. Can we get two-way glass? No. No. And the other thing is I always have them off property. I would never do a focus
Mm,
group on property. So you need to get a hotel meeting room, or you need to find somewhere where nobody feels like they're protecting a turf, or where they
yeah.
feel at home. Now, I won't feel at home and they won't feel at home. And, maybe not everybody would agree with that, but I think that's really important, especially if you got a little bit of a dicey topic you need to talk about and you
Hmm.
Right.
need to work through.
I love
Absolutely.
that.
What about focus questions, Chuck?
Well, focus questions, this is the meat of it. This was Ashley's talking about her 10 questions, I believe, or this is
Hmm.
what you're trying to find out. So, what do you think the biggest problems are in your work group? If you could make one change, what would that change be?
Right.
If those, depending on what the question is and all the rest of it, but this is where you're likely to get most of your data from that then you can triangulate with what you find out in your surveys and other stuff, even if you're benchmarking things.
You
And
know, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead. No, no.
Well, I was just going to say, I think about the way that I pose my questions, and sometimes it almost feels like if it could be a Likert scale question in a survey, is this the type of question that I want to ask, right? Like,
Hmm.
one thing that always is important is like, what is the least valuable training resource that you have to,
That
right?
was usually me, but well, that's a whole different series of questions.
Right,
Now that's
yeah.
interesting. Let me ask you something, Ashley, because this is something that I struggle with when I write focus group
Mhm.
questions, is whether I want to have one answer or not, or whether I want to have an open gate where people can say whatever they want to up to their minute. So if I say, gee whiz, do you think that the workplace is A, getting better, B, about the same, C, getting worse, D, intolerable? See, I struggle sometimes with those kind of Likerts or
Right.
sublimative Likerts, and I think each question in each group is different. I've just what I usually get in those from participants is a head shake.
Right. So I wouldn't ask that question, but using that as the major question that you want to answer, create questions based on that. So knowing that, for example, there are different elements of your work environment. Those are the types I would ask questions like, based on your experience, right? So we would have people in the room that have been there for less than a year to people that have been here for 5 years.
Hmm.
So, generally speaking, based on your experience, what have you seen change in your work environment since
Okay.
joining?
So
Yeah.
it's an open-ended question, not giving them options, but more so an open-ended question so that they can then take off with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't want to frame the answer before they have a chance to give it.
Mm.
And this brings up another point too. How do you feel about having different levels of management in the same focus group population, like having a manager of a group in with their group? And I've
Oh,
really tried to stay away from that. But
right,
sometimes
exactly.
that's another thing that clients will demand is, well, the leader of that group really has something to say on this topic. And I say, that's exactly why they're not going to be in there. I want
Yeah,
to hear from the rest of the people. Unless you want to have an entire group of managers in the focus group, I'm happy to do that. We'll do that all day. But you got to think about starting this mix of populations and what that does to the chemistry in this group.
exactly.
Speaking of chemistry within a group, do you all ever find that you have problems with group think? So, maybe the person who is the most outgoing and the most influential has an answer, and then everybody sort of rallies behind that answer. Maybe they had a different answer before that person spoke, but now it's group think, and they all start to have the same type of reaction. Does that ever happen in focus
It ha-
groups? And if
it
so, what do you
happens.
do?
It happens every time.
It does.
And
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And what I always do is say, okay, well, what do you feel, number three?
Right.
Or what do you think, Denise? And then there's this long pause. And most of the time, they'll reach down into their socks and pull up, a little bit of energy and say what they think because you've given them a safe spot to do that. And
Hmm.
you point to the ground rule says nothing's personal. Everybody
Mm.
has an opinion. And you go through that, but I don't think I've ever seen a focus group where I didn't have that. And this goes back to how you pick the people. So if you're
Hmm.
doing every nth person, you're always going to get an introvert and an extrovert and everybody else in the middle, and that's fine. But then you've got to think, okay, I'm going to have this every time. I'm going to have an informal group leader. I'm going to have a manager. I'm going to have someone who will have one thing to say and it will be profound. I mean, did you always find that too? There was always that one participant that would say one thing in this
Yeah.
entire focus group, but it was so
We'll leave us
profound
go
that
home.
everybody else just so you just never know, but you got to create those spaces for them to talk.
And God forbid that's the person who answers the question first, right? Like
Yeah.
that.
So then I grab my
Oh.
guitar and go through a medley of my one hit. Um, that's what happens in that case. Um, but it's
Mm-mm.
just so much fun. Now we're talking about it. I miss doing these. I haven't done them for a while. And I really love doing these. They're such a hoot.
I mean, like it really does become a really interesting exercise, in terms of understanding how you can disrupt groupthink. So, Denise, to your question, that's where being very present and in the moment is important because you want to be able to listen to the way people are responding, noticing the body language of your participants to see where you can shake things up or, who else you can engage in the room. That's one thing that I think is so crucial about disrupting groupthink is like really, really without picking apart someone's response, redirecting your energy
Yep.
to someone else or just saying, I want to shift topics real quick and discuss.
I love that. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Redirect.
So anybody see there's a sale at Penny's? You could do all kinds of stuff. And that got me to think about something too we haven't talked about yet, which is room arrangement. So
Mm.
what I typically do is a circle with no desk, nowhere to hide, nowhere to have fiddly fingers that you can't
Mhm.
see. And you can tell a lot if you get into body language and you believe in the science of that, which I do. You can start to see who's castling and who doesn't want to participate and who's
Mhm.
leaning forward and wants to talk all the time. And so there's other ways to do rooms. And actually, I don't know how you do them. I mean, sometimes you're stuck with a classroom and you got a
Right.
U shaped and a facilitator in the middle. But if I have any choice in it, I've got a circle where there's no head and no tail and nobody can sit in a corner and govern it. If you look at,
Yeah.
there's a whole science of how you set up rooms,
Mhm.
which makes my mind spin when I read this stuff, and there's a lot of truth to it. But I think for a focus group, it's the Knights of the Round Table, and all of us
Mhm.
have equal sitting and equal ability to speak and govern. And is that what you try to do too, or you have something else you do?
No, I mean, if I have the opportunity to do that, yeah, like that seems ideal. But I remember the last one that I did, that was not the case. It was definitely a classroom setup. And I was like in the center with a chair with wheels, kind of just going back and
Oh,
forth. And then people were trying to sit further away. And that was a
oh yeah,
bit, yeah,
yeah. What do you do when people stand up and leave? You ever have that happen?
Oh.
God, no. No, I
Oh.
I've
think
had
I'm
that.
I'm captivating enough that people want. I mean, I
Well,
think
yeah.
too. So the last one that I did, I was in a space with people who all they want to do is talk about themselves. Like
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. Okay.
I
Yeah.
was working at an organization that very much was about, I want to be the first person to say something and I want it to be the most profound thing and it never is,
The
right?
introverts
But
club, right? Yeah.
yeah. And so in that space, everybody wanted to share what they had to say.
Well, I've had people actually stand up saying, I am not going to participate in this. And off
Oh,
they go. And I said, well, thank you for coming and trying. We appreciate that. We love you. Keep in touch. Give us a forwarding address. I mean, I don't know what you say then. Um,
Right.
now, does that come down to just the selection process of the participants? And can we talk a little bit about how you do that? How do you select
well,
participants?
if I've got a large group, like when I do something that's 35 or 40,000 people in an organization, I do every nth within departments.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And you can do the math and figure it out. Sometimes it's every thousandth person because they can give you a list of employees. And it
Right.
doesn't matter who they are or anything else. If you just go with a master list and it's every 1,000th person and it's 35,000 people, then you've got 35 participants and you can put those into how many focus groups you want, which is what I'd like to do. I really like to have this blind participation.
Oh,
And I've
okay.
found that when I ask people if they want to participate in a focus group, what I get is the extroverts, and the introverts stay home because they don't want to do it. And I want everybody in here. I can hopefully I'm skilled enough that I can bring an introvert out and make some at least have a discussion about something and get some points across that they want to make, even if I
Right.
have to clear the field and put the spotlight on them and ignore everybody else for a little bit.
Mhm.
But that's how I do it. But then you got organizations and clients who want to tell you who's going to be in this. And that's when Chuck goes home because I'm just not going to do it that way. It's not scientific. It's political now. We've created more problems that we're trying to solve instead of trying to
Hmm.
address problems that we're trying to solve.
Hmm. So you approach it with, so when you select them yourself, you approach it as like you send them communication that says you've been selected to be part of this
Hmm.
focus group, your opinion
Hmm.
matters, and
Yep.
it's you give them all the kind of like
Well, the other thing that we always did, and maybe this sounds a little hokey, but we always had prizes. We
Hmm.
always gave them something substantial to participate. So if they came in and sat there and did nothing, they still got something. And it was either dinner at a nice restaurant
Mhm.
or something that was not in any way politically or in any way associated with the organization. So I can remember once we did fruit baskets. I mean, we had a whole room full of fruit baskets. But I always thought it was important to reward people for participating. So part of the outreach was we are going to do something special for you at the end of this. We appreciate that you're going to take your time to do this and be involved in it. And we're going to try to reward you for that experience.
Hmm.
So I always insisted the clients come up with something. And sometimes they were stuff that I would like to have. And so, like, I'd like a
For
new
that
Buick.
one person that walks out before they get their fruit basket, right?
Yeah. So, gee, Chuck, here we have an extra.
Obviously the gift was not good enough for that person who got up and walked out.
No, they got the new Buick. I mean, it all
Oh,
worked out.
okay. They
We did
sat
an
long
Oprah.
enough.
You get a car, and you get a car, and but no,
Yeah.
I think that people should be rewarded for doing this kind of stuff. I
Hmm.
mean, you know,
Ashley, how do you
you-
go about with getting participants? Is it based
Yeah.
on sort of random selection like that? Like,
I'm
every so
working on the
many.
wrong projects. Like, how is it that I can't get incentives? No one ever, oh man, I think I'm just like so interesting that people, no.
well, that's it. I mean, the prize itself is just being in the same room with you, Ashley. Why would
There you
anybody
go.
want anything?
Exactly. So, I mean, essentially, what I do, I try to like focus on as much as possible how I can pull out different experience levels. Because, like, I try to have a diverse focus group where I can. Um, so, in terms of like, if I'm getting people from survey data, right, I'll try to do that. And structure it in a way that I know that it's as close to a balanced amount of people representing all different types of experience levels if I can gather that group. Um, and also just reaching, like, sometimes I will cold call people and just be like, hey, who in your office or your organization or your department do you want to hear from? Who do you least want to hear from, and why?
So you pick the one they least want to hear from. See,
And if I
I'd want them
can,
both. Yeah, I'd want them both.
yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And there was something that you had said that struck a chord that I wanted to like circle back on, but I think it was mostly just the idea that I don't know, it'll come back to me. Yeah, but those are the things that I do in terms of like how I pick my audiences is I try
Okay.
to make them. I wish I could incentivize them. God,
Yeah.
someday.
You can come to a free
You could
live
do that.
show on
Yeah.
Tuesdays
No, absolutely.
Exactly.
This
for
would be so much fun.
participating.
I'm gonna try
But I
and get
think
some
you bring up a good
baskets
point
next time.
about different levels of experience and in terms of how they provide legacy in an organization, how long they've been there. And if I'm
Right.
doing something to gather content information, so I'm looking at a job skill analysis or task analysis, I will have three levels of participants. I'll have the person
Mm-hmm.
that's been doing it forever, the person that's
Mm-hmm.
been doing it 5 years or so, and the person that's been doing it for a week. Because I want to hear
Yep.
from all three of those levels, right?
Yes.
I have not had that experience in a focus group, and maybe I'll have to think about it in terms
I
of,
have.
yeah. So I think
It
that's a
was
good point. Really good point.
it was really interesting too because in this organization you could have 1,000 people, and that's no exaggeration, with the
Yeah.
same title who do explicitly very different things.
Well,
And
it's
so,
like in the banking industry, everybody's a vice president.
It's
If
like
you're working,
it's like in a
right?
university. Everybody's a
Yeah,
coordinator or a specialist
yeah,
or
or a
assistant
professor in
director
my
or
case.
right.
Anybody can spell professor is one. Um, so you got
But
all these titles. Yeah, no, that's so
exactly.
true.
And
Yeah,
what ended up happening is that I brought in people based on their title and their level of years of experience,
hmm,
not realizing that one of the people there belonged in a completely different audience group.
but that tells you something too, right? Especially if
Yes.
a client classifies them in a certain way, and then they get there, and you figure out, well, here's your first problem. You got the wrong, you got the wrong people in the wrong places, pretty
Mhm.
obviously, right? So that's all part of your report that you send later. That these are my
It sure
observations.
was.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That's good. So I think
Yeah.
this is all good stuff, and our audience of what one? Do we have anybody in our audience at this point?
This is
If you're
going
out
on the
there,
internet. We have an infinite
yes,
number of
yes, we
audience.
yes, and
do.
we have incentives for the first 500 people to respond. If you respond
Yes.
by seven,
The replays always do better anyway.
yeah. So I think focus groups, this is so cool. And I would encourage anybody who's in instructional design, especially if you're just getting started, have fun with focus groups. I mean, you can do them very benignly and do it with friends. It's kind of like a card game sometimes if you want to, Denise.
I have a question now because in the times of now people are online, they're remote, workforces are online. Can you do these focus groups online, like in Zoom? Is that how that would
Oh,
work?
absolutely. In
Okay.
fact, we've been doing them remotely for years. It's nothing new.
Okay. And in your opinion, what's better? Like what yields the better
Nothing.
results?
Nothing.
I'm gonna say the mute button, maybe. I don't know.
But do you
Um,
get
I,
do you feel like in your analysis afterwards, do you feel like they're just as valuable in person as they are online, or is there one preferred over the other?
well, see, I think this goes back to the facilitation. I think if you design your facilitation in a way, and one thing you'll find if you're doing remote focus groups, because people are remote, all right, they're working in isolated places. And I remember one international company that had to do with satellites. So they had downlinks in places where people don't even know are places. And it was a group they were trying to get information from about training because they were having a problem at this point distributing training. And what they were doing is just shooting it down the pipeline to these remote locations where two, three, five people were. And one person would sit in front of a desktop and take this course or that course. And when we got into actually looking at what these folks wanted, what they wanted is to be together because they were always alone. So, right? It's this notion of I work alone all day in this very cold or very hot place. And the only thing I see is on this 24-inch monitor. I would like to have a living, breathing person in the same room as we learn something or as we work through something. So, doing a remote focus group actually got us to the notion that we need to have these people in the same place, which I found incredibly interesting. It's the whole process created an answer. It wasn't
Mhm.
the content was the answer, it was the process was the answer.
I love that.
Yeah. I have a question for both of you now. What do you think, Ashley, is the biggest power of focus groups?
Hmm.
Oh, you have a direct line to your
Mhm.
audience, sometimes your end user, right? And your stakeholder. Like, that is the person, 9 times out of 10, that's the last person people listen to. And that's the first person that's supposed to take the product. That's the value and the power of it. And that's the shame that it's so underutilized.
Chuck,
Yeah.
what would you say to that?
I think
Anything
the
more to add?
power, well, I couldn't add anything to that. It was perfect. But what else I would say is that the thing that's different is the thing that's the most powerful. Is you're not collecting data in a very abstract way. What you're doing is
Right.
interacting with people and having communication with them. And you're actually having a conversation. If you have focus group, it's just answers, you have nothing. But if you create a focus group that's conversations between a facilitator and those participating, then you've
Hmm.
opened up a world that you cannot get any other way. There's no other way you can do this. And if you do it skillfully and if you choose your participants correctly and you do all the things that we've talked about, there is no other medium that you can use in analysis and evaluation that's more powerful, in my estimation.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow, that's powerful, powerful way to, I guess, conclude the talk about focus groups. Or do we have
So
additional
Yeah.
go do
things?
them.
So let's focus on what Denise learned tonight.
Yeah, I wrote down some notes.
No, you got notes?
I do. My
Denise
brain, my
always has
brain,
notes.
my brain does not like. I don't have that kind of brain where I can remember things like that. I can remember birthdays. Like I can remember like a stranger's birthday 10 years in the future. But ask me to
How do you
remember.
do that?
I
How
don't
do you?
know. And it just, Hector is like boggled by it. He's like, how do you
Well,
know that? I have random things I remember, like dates of certain events. And he's like, how do you remember that? And I'm like, I don't understand it. I know his friends' birthdays from the military. And he's like, I haven't talked to them in 10 years. How do you remember their birthday? I have no idea. But when it comes to like this kind of stuff, I have to write notes.
okay.
Yeah. So one of the things that I really liked was the whole don't frame your answer in a question. I love
Hmm.
that. It's so obvious, but I think that I mean I've taken so many surveys and I've been asked to answer a question and they've already given me the answer and I'm like
Terrible
it's
question. Yes.
yes, and that
Well,
happens
see, when
all the
you,
time.
and this brings up an interesting point about surveys and everything else. Any instructional design that's honest with it will tell you that there are times when a client wants certain answers, or at least answers to go in a certain direction. And
Hmm.
any skilled instructional designer can ask questions in such a way that you can get these answers. It's just like political polling or anything else. When I
Yes.
worked in the political world, I could put together questions that I would get the answer I wanted every time because that's just how you do it. And I think the important thing about focus groups and instructional design, where this is really a pure medium and we really want to get data that's what it should be and we don't play games like that, is that the best way to do this is to let people talk. Just put that carrot out there and now tell me about what's going on. Tell me why this works and why this doesn't work from your perspective. And I think that's the other thing too. You always have to bring it back and personalize it and say, actually,
Hmm.
from your perspective, why is this not going as well as it might?
That's powerful because
Hmm.
it helps somebody to feel like they have been heard and understood, and that isn't that what we all want?
No.
Absolutely.
And a facilitator should always engage with each individual that they're talking to. Look them in the eye, respond to everything that they say, a head nod, or take a note, or do something that acknowledges that you are listening. And this is
Hmm.
communications 101, but it's never more important than it is in this medium.
That's powerful. The other thing that I really loved was when you mentioned to attack the problem, not the person. I feel
Right.
like that is true of anything in life, and most people are not trained to do that. They're really not trained to do that. It's the natural
Right.
thing to go after the person, not the problem, and nothing gets solved that way. But I feel like as a ground rule, that's a really important ground rule to set, is to put that in their mind to, this is not personal. We're talking about problems. Let's figure out how we can solve problems and make this a better place for you by solving
And
those
I would even
problems.
take that farther because one preamble that I've always taught instructional designers, and I have it in all my books, is instructional designers should not have an opinion.
Mm.
You should
Okay.
never have an
Yeah.
opinion. You provide facts, you provide data, you provide suggestions, you provide recommendations, but you
Right.
should never, ever, ever once in your entire career have an opinion. Because as soon as the designer has an opinion, you're done.
It's
You're done.
personal. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
And people will stop talking to you, they'll stop listening to you, they'll stop working with you, even if they have to. And I've found that the best place to be is the neutral zone. I'm here to listen. I'm here to find solutions. I need you to help me do that. I do not have an opinion about what's right and wrong. All I'm doing is
Right.
gathering data.
So that just leads me to my last conclusion, is that you have to be a really great communicator when you're facilitating these things. You have to be, like Ashley said, an active listener. That is such an important soft skill. Like we talked about soft skills in our last live session with you, Ashley. It's such an important soft skill, is to build that active listening skill set, because
Yeah.
that when you have that ability to actively listen, you are able to glean so much more from that conversation, and that person, I feel, on the receiving end of that opens up, doesn't feel as vulnerable, feels comfortable and safe sharing information because they feel understood and heard.
Well,
Absolutely.
I think it's so important. And when I learned to negotiate, I learned from Nuremberg. If you know anything about negotiations, he wrote the book on negotiations. And I was lucky enough to have an organization pay for me to take his course in negotiation. And the one thing I learned as a negotiator is I listen 99 times and I say something once. And he said even that might be too much talking. You need to find that point of resonance and act on it. And I think it's a skill that anybody can evolve to. Any designer can be a good focus group administrator and facilitator, but you have to take your ego out of it. You've got to take your ideas out of it. You have to take your opinions out of it. You've got to be this neutral third party that's in there to listen and resolve and find solutions. And I think all of us can do that. I think some of us are better than others. Actually, I know is tremendous at it. And, she just has this natural ability to connect with people. And Denise, you do too. I think you would be a perfect focus group facilitator. But it's something we can all arrive at a level of sustained performance, I guess is the best way to put it. But it's something we can all do. And I think you're right on, Denise, about that.
Absolutely, yes. I feel like it would be really great if we can't, I don't know, if we could give a resource. Like, where can people learn more about conducting focus groups? Do you have any recommendations for resources, or maybe an organization, maybe ATD Press? Because I
Well, I
feel
know
like,
one person that's written some books on this that includes that this appears in chapters in this individual's books.
Mhm.
So if you have any of the ISD from the ground up or the new textbook, yeah, that whoever that guy is, I think he was picked up on a speeding charge or something. I'm not sure what's going on.
well,
Right.
yeah,
I
definitely.
did see his picture at the post office recently. So, um, there are resources to go to, but I think here's what I would recommend. And Ashley, you jump in, and Denise, you tell us where we're both wrong. But I think to get background on just what they are and feel comfortable with the format and doing those things, then I think you look at things I've written and things that Ashley's talked about and put forward, and then you come up with your own plan.
Hmm.
And I think this should be an entrepreneurial project. This should be something that you find the best way for you to be able to do this. And don't rely on Chuck's or anybody else's except for background information. Because
Right.
each of these focus groups is different. And if you do 5 of them in a day, each of those 5 will be different. And you've just got to be flexible enough to go with a plan and implement it as best you can. Sure, we'll do the opening questions and we'll get into the real meat of the questions, and you'll have closing questions. If you could tell the boss one thing, what would you tell them? However you decide you want to do this. But I think where the real comfort lies, and this is a facilitator, is to be able to say that you did this your way, and I feel comfortable doing it my way. And I learned things from all these other places, but this is how I do them, and this is how I feel comfortable doing. And I would encourage everyone to evolve to that point. So Ashley and I do them a little differently, and Denise, you will do them differently. And it doesn't mean one's right or wrong, because it's not a value system in that way.
Mhm.
It's whatever works for you and your personality and your background and how you best communicate. Because all three of us communicate differently. I mean, we could argue effectiveness in my case, but with you two, you're good communicators, and you just find a way to make it work. And that's what I would encourage everybody to do, is just look at
Find a way to
the
make
way.
it work.
Solid line of advice there. I like that.
My answer might surprise you, but I would honestly,
No, I don't think it will.
I would look into resources on how to cross-examine on a witness stand.
Yeah, go to
Ooh.
law school. Do law school.
Yeah. No, I'm serious. So when I
No,
was
I'm too. Yeah.
right, yeah, I was a senior in high school, and I did a law and government program where we had to actually take a bar, not a bar exam, but like what's the one that
Like the
the LSATs.
Oh yes.
Oh,
And
the LSATs. Oh, you're
right,
bringing
yeah.
back nightmares.
But one of the things that we had to do is we had a module on moot court, and we had to
Yep.
learn how to question a witness and
Yep.
cross-examine them. And
Yep.
that really trained me out of asking yes or no questions when I want open-ended answers.
Nice.
So I would say if you can do any kind of research in how attorneys structure questions for cross-examination or anything like that, that I think is a valuable resource to train your brain in really listening to the information being presented versus what someone is explicitly saying. Because you
Oh,
have to listen
That's
through that.
a
I
really good point.
I
And
love
you
that.
bring back two or three Chuck stories, which I can't tell here. But the point of this being that, I was in law enforcement at a sergeant,
Right.
and he went on and retired and went to law school. And he wanted me to go to law school. And, I just wasn't fit for law school. Can you imagine me as an attorney? you know, I'd now be working in retail or something. But which there's nothing wrong with working in retail, because we've all done that.
Mhm.
But the notion of, how you do that. So I was thinking about experiences I had with him, because he would take me along when he would do depositions. And I would get to sit there and eat pretend like I was in his law practice. And I'd put on my Kmart suit and go with him. And I learned so much watching him do depositions. And he would frame questions in such a way that he could only get one answer. I don't want you to explain this. I want you to answer this one question. And he would go through this. And then he went on and got elected a judge, which I would sit in the back of the courtroom. And of course, I'd start laughing and he would ask me to leave. But he was so good as a judge because he would not let anybody get by with anything. You couldn't get out there and float a story. And whether
Exactly.
it was true or not true or whatever, it's just the point of how he would operate in a classroom, and in that case, in a courtroom. And I'm so glad you brought that up. It got me to think of Jim. That's a very pleasant thought. So thank you for that.
And I'm so glad that you brought it up too, because this weekend I'm going to my nephew's wedding, and my nephew is a lawyer, and so him and his wife are lawyers, and I'm just going to be like, "Hey, while we're eating our cake, listen."
Listen, so on a cross-examination.
Got any
Exactly.
Okay,
pointers?
Chuck. Okay, Chuck. When did you stop holding up 7-Elevens? Right? There's no answer to that question. And that's one thing Jim would always tell me. You have to answer a question they can only answer one way. And
Right.
it's clever to do it that way. And I'm not sure how much I would do that in focus groups. I'm kind of falling and rolling down the hill here with this. But I'm so glad you brought that up, Ashley. It's such a pleasant memory thinking of Jim and all that stuff we used to do. So Even though I
Oh,
can't tell you any of these stories, that you're right about an attorney's approach to gathering information,
It's
which they're
really great.
incredibly
just
good at.
saying. It's I think it's a valuable resource. As instructional designers, we pull from all over the place, right?
True. Oh, so
And
true. Yes.
right, yeah. So, coming in, presenting your questions to your client, knowing that you've done the research into, how to depose someone, or how to cross-examine, how to ask questions in that space will really help you, because you learn to think so quickly on your feet, and like, well, you said this. Can you expand on that? Or what are some other things that you've noticed as a result of X, right?
Yeah.
So,
This brings up a good point. What we should do, Denise, is find an attorney. I think I've got one. My
Oh.
attorney is just out of law school about 5 years ago.
Hmm.
I'll bet that she would come on. I got to talk to Logan and see if she'd come on and talk about how to get people to answer questions in a.
Oh, that would be phenomenal.
Yeah, I'll
that'd be
see if Logan
interesting.
would do that. She would love it, or she'd hate it. I'm not going to speak for her because she's an attorney. But or maybe one of your cousins or your cousin's wife, right?
Maybe my nephew and his wife, they're newlyweds, can come on. They're
Oh,
really
they're your
cute.
nephew. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Or Ashley, I bet you know somebody. Not you've any legal
No,
issues,
I
but
do know lawyers. Yeah.
so I think we all have those, and that might be it. Would you like to do that, Ashley? Maybe we could do a 3-by-1. We got enough screen space, Denise. We can put an attorney in there
We
too.
can put an attorney. We can have up to 4 people with this interview mode.
Okay, so maybe we'll find somebody that everybody would like to talk and see if they can
Hmm.
come on. And would that be interesting? Would you like it, Ashley?
I think so. Yeah, but I think everything is interesting. So don't ask me.
Well, and
That's how
that's
I
the
ended up here. No.
and you bring up the point about the universality of what we do as instructional designers, and I have found that every aspect of my life, my professional life, I use instructional design. And I've reinvented myself 3 or 4 times, going from working at AT&T long lines to law enforcement to everything else I've done. And each one of those things, there were skills that I bring to what I do as an instructional designer. And the
Absolutely.
more universal your skill set and the more background and history you have, and this is one thing I get all the time from instructional designers that just start new. And even though they're of one age or another, have had 2 careers or they're retired or whatever they've decided to move on from, they're worried that they can't do this work. And I tell them that they're so more prepared for this than a lot of people because they have so many skills that they bring to this that they'll instantly be able to use.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's
Is that crazy? Or, I mean,
No.
think about all the Denise. You've done a bunch of stuff, and I'm not going to get into it
a,
because that's your
a,
story.
a
But
bunch.
I mean,
Yes.
a bunch of really cool stuff. So, how much of that would you not use in instructional design?
I would
Those
use
same
all of it.
skills.
I would use all of it.
Exactly.
I mean, the writing, the video production, the interviewing,
Yeah.
the editing, all of that stuff all plays a part. It all plays a part.
Hmm.
Yeah, it really
And
does.
actually, your career path. I mean, it's like
It's the darndest thing. It's
yeah, it's like
crazy.
a Google map from here to
Yes.
Saskatchewan. It's a
Yeah.
straight line.
And,
And
and like, I wanted to be a lawyer since I was 4 years old. And then I
and
wanted
you'd
to
be
be a
a great one.
lobbyist.
You would be
Well,
a
your mother
great
brought you
attorney.
up with root cause analysis. I mean,
Right. Right.
we're
I
always
had
Yeah, so we
dissecting the
need to.
facts.
That came out in therapy, I bet, didn't it?
right. Yeah. Among other things, right? So, but going from political science, which was my first degree, and
Oh, I love poli
also,
sci.
right, yeah, and but to your point, Chuck, I also was, a pageant queen in high school and an actress and a
Oh,
singer.
Denise, we got to get those pictures.
Yeah,
No, we
that would be
don't.
so
Are those on
fun.
the internet?
I'm not gonna
Next
say.
time we're going to splash them across the screen.
Oh, Ashley,
I've
you are
I've
so
lived
cool.
enough life that those should be buried in my Google search. But having all of those elements come together, I thought that politics would be the thing that would bring all of those aspects of my life together, and to see how they have made me be so much more successful in instructional design.
Yep. No, it's absolutely
it,
true.
Yeah,
I mean, I've got so much political background, I don't talk about it here because it makes no difference. But just the act of organizing campaigns and working with people and getting volunteers and all the stuff that goes in a
Hmm.
political campaign and making
yep.
decisions that nobody wants to make. It's instructional design all over again. It's just a
And then
different way of
not
looking at
being
it.
right, and not being emotionally invested in
No,
the
you can't be.
outcome.
You can't be ever. No, if you live and die on each one of your projects, you're going to have one project. It's just going to be too emotional for you. So that goes back to
Exactly.
that neutrality and no opinion too, right? You can walk away from any of these things clean, knowing you did your best work, and whatever happened happened after that, because you have no control
All that
over it.
matters.
Once that project goes,
It goes.
it goes. It's gone. You got to say goodbye. Wish it well. Keep in
Right.
touch, but you're not responsible for it once you let go of it. And I've seen
Mhm.
so many designers really angst over projects that went south that had nothing to do with their work. It was stuff that happened later. People
Yeah.
couldn't manage it, or they
Mm.
set up the implementation model incorrectly. And, you just have to be okay with those things sometimes. So I don't know. I think this was pretty cool. Did you enjoy this tonight?
I know I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I learned a
Yeah.
lot, and I'm very interested in focus groups, and the whole facilitation of them really intrigues me because I love talking with people. Excuse me, I love
Yeah.
talking with
You would
people.
be you would be so
I,
good at this.
I
You really
love
would,
being able to
Denise.
like just be that active listener and be that bridge of the dialogue, and I really think that would
We
be
Yeah, you
really
should
didn't
do that.
interesting.
we didn't touch on this, but believe it or not, my favorite part of focus groups is the transcription aspect at the end,
Mm.
where I'm
Oh,
sitting in a dark room with hours and hours of recordings, and I can just sit and listen back and like confirm, okay, this was the question I asked, this was the conversation that resulted, and here are
yeah.
all of my notes, and that's my favorite part.
Really? Now, why is that? That fascinates me.
Oh, because it's analysis. Like you're literally just picking apart what somebody is saying without any interruption. And you can
Hmm.
see how it correlates to survey result. Like to me, that is where the triangulation
Mm.
happens. Like if I have the opportunity, I try to do my survey collection at the front. I try to do my review of extant data at the end or in the middle, and I do my focus groups in the middle. So I'm
That's
not,
interesting.
Hmm.
influencing one thing or the other, and I have all of this recording data that I can sit and listen to uninterrupted and say this relates to a trend I'm seeing in this set of surveys, or like I see how this conversation piece connects back to the way that all of these courses have been executed and why it's not working. Like
Mm.
That's
that to
that's
me is my
Well,
favorite
fascinating.
part.
what fascinates me about that is, you talked about how my skill sets sort of play into instructional design, like all of ours do. And part of my job as a video producer is I interview people all day long. And then from that, I create transcripts of those interviews. And I love going through the transcripts of it because I storyboard and I pull out parts that are just so excellent. And I string
Right.
them together and I put it into a story so it's absorbable, so it's digestible for people. But I love that part of being able to like rediscover what was said,
Really?
even though I heard it with my own ears. I love being able to rediscover those golden
Yeah.
Oh.
nugget moments, those comments
Now,
that
see,
just
you
like
two are making me feel horrible because
because you hate
I'm an
transcription.
idea person. Like, I like to have an idea, and I like everybody else to do it and send me the results. So when I do a focus group, I always have them transcribed, and I'll come up with some rubric that I can. Of course, I like to put everything in numbers, so I will put a value on each question and answer, and then I'll do some Excel spreadsheet, and then there'll be some graph that'll come out of it and say, well, I got 47% acceptance to this concept. And
Hmm. Oh
yeah.
no.
Oh, you've never done it? Oh, well, we're way over time here, so we'll do this another night. But no, I put numbers on everything. So if it's a Likert
Mhm.
5, I rate those and put a value to each, and then go across the population and surveys and everything else, and see what if I've got a difference in numbers between surveys and focus groups. I want to find out why those numbers are different? Is it because of the format, or is there something I missed when I was doing the surveys? And the other thing I always did, I did the surveys first before I did the focus groups. I never did the focus
Right.
groups before the surveys. And
Right.
people have said that's wrong. I've had people disagree with that. So I don't know what's right, but I always wanted that base set of data to come up with my
Yeah.
questions for the focus groups.
That's like a discovery
Yeah.
session. I would consider that almost a discovery session to be able to understand what you need to
Yeah.
be focusing on in the focus group. But
But I would have them transcribed, so I'm lazy. So you two are superstars.
So you're
I'm
more
the lazy.
quantitative versus qualitative then?
Oh, I
That's
have to
what
have
you're
numbers. If I
okay.
can't quantify something, I don't believe it.
ah,
Well, doesn't that seem right from what you know of me?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah. So
absolutely.
pray
very
for me, my
tracks.
friends. So we're way over time. I want to thank everybody for joining Denise and Ashley and I. And Ashley, thank you so much for being here with us. You really bring the life and the sparkle to this, and we so appreciate it. And you're just special. So please join us again soon. I know we've got a whole set of dates, and we'll come up with other stuff to talk about. If you're watching this post, if you would hit the like button, and if you haven't subscribed, we would appreciate that too. But remember, this channel is not monetized. We don't have a Patreon. We're doing this out of our love of the field of instructional design. So if you want to help support us and support the field, and if you support this channel, then maybe more people will watch. And if you just learn one thing out of a video, then I'll be thrilled to death. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.